Video games take a lot of time, effort and money to put together with the aim of creating something that keeps players engaged and ultimately bringing in a tidy sum of cash. The unfortunate reality, however, is that sometimes the end result ends up crashing and burning, often with disastrous consequences for the developers involved in their conception. Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be talking about 10 of the biggest financial flops in gaming history. Starting us off at number 10, we have Mario and Luigi, Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey. It may come as a surprise to see us starting this list with something as prolific as a Mario title, and in most cases the word flop and Nintendo's poster child would never appear in the same sentence, so why was this title an exception? This was the latest remake of the Mario and Luigi series to hit Nintendo's portable console, the 3DS, and being one of the most lucrative of the original Mario and Luigi series, selling almost 4.5 million copies, it's not surprised the gaming giant decided it was worth their time releasing a remake. So why did it fail? Ultimately, a number of factors are attributed to the commercial failure of this title. The Nintendo Switch had been around for nearly 2 years, by the time of its release meaning it was released at the end of the 3DS life cycle. As a result, the outdated hardware meant that the game played relatively poorly compared to what players were now used to, and the extra content of Bowser Jr.'s Journey was very poorly received, often being described as boring and shallow. This combination of factors meant that while the original title sold a total of around 4.5 million copies, the remake only managed around 9,000 copies, falling incredibly short of expectations and ultimately leading to developer Alpha Dream filing for bankruptcy shortly after release. Next at number 9 we have Daikatana. Developed by Ion Storm and created by John Romero, released in 2000 on PC and the Nintendo 64, and theorised to be the natural successor to the incredibly successful Doom. Naturally, with Doom's success, and one of the co-designers for the game working on this title, the game was hotly anticipated by gamers. However, after a rather lengthy development period, it eventually released to mostly negative reviews. One of the main factors that led to that lengthy development cycle was Quake 2. Developed by ID Software, Quake 2 was previewed when development for Daikatana was well underway. This previewed something far superior to the first installment in the Quake series, and unfortunately Daikatana was being developed using the same engine that was used in the first Quake game. Ultimately, this led to Romero, who was leading the development of the game, scrapping what had been done up to this point and starting again from scratch. This meant the game released a whole 3 years after the initial planned release date and only managed to sell a total of around 40,000 copies, some way short of the 2.5 million copies required to make back its budget. Next at number 8 we have Darksiders II. Darksiders II was released in 2012 and was one of the most expensive video game projects developed at the time, with a budget of $50 million, and it is precisely because of this budget many fans of the series will tell you the game failed. It sold 1.5 million copies, which, considering its niche audience and far from AAA status, isn't exactly something to scoff at. However, developer THQ said that the game did not sell or perform to its expectations, due to falling short of their targeted sales and several other poor investments made by the company. Further developments and a sequel to the game were postponed, and THQ filed for bankruptcy, ultimately selling the rights to the game along with their other assets. Nordic Games ended up acquiring the THQ trademark and rebranding to THQ Nordic, and did actually end up releasing the sequel, Darksiders III. While not getting mind-blowing sales figures, did go on to become profitable, and due to its much lower initial budget could be considered a success for the new developer, at the very least successful enough for them to have recently announced they will be releasing a 4th installment, which gives fans of the series something to look forward to. At number 7 we have Shenmue. This may come as a shock to some, as Shenmue is now considered a cult classic and is often praised for pioneering open-world gameplay and popularising the use of quick-time events. While this much is true, its initial release was considered a commercial failure. Shenmue had a budget of somewhere between $47 and $70 million, although a portion of this was used to develop Shenmue 2, hence the massive difference in the estimated cost of the first installment, and despite selling 1.2 million copies, it could never make up the cost of the budget in order to become profitable, despite the fact that these numbers should have made it a resounding success when compared to sales figures of other titles at the time. Released in 1999, one of the reasons attributed to the game's failure was the platform it released on. The Sega Dreamcast unfortunately didn't hold anywhere near the market share in the industry at the time, having to compete with the likes of the Nintendo 64 and Sony's original PlayStation. The commercial failure that was Shenmue is also one of the main reasons Sega abandoned the game console industry, highlighting just how much the project fell short of expectations. That being said, the Shenmue persevered, with its latest installment releasing as recently as 2019. Next on our list in at number 6 is Defiance. Defiance was a third-person shooter MMO developed by Triumph Worlds, released in 2013 across multiple platforms along with a tie-in TV show. Despite the significant potential marketing boost from the TV show, the game struggled to gain any real traction, and after a mere 12 months changed strategy and became a free-to-play game. This ultimately made it even more difficult for the game to recoup the cost of development, which, considering the 5-year time frame and $80 million that were pumped into development, is a clear indication at how desperate the developers were to get people to play the game. Although initially a commercial failure and the series coming to an end, the servers for the game remained active for some time, only shutting down completely in 2021. However, Fox Games have this year taken over development and publishing rights for the game and re-released a PC version of the game as recently as April. Although original DLC content is not currently available, the game has started to pick up traction. Whether Fox Games will succeed where Triumph Games failed, however, is yet to be seen. Taking up the halfway slot at number 5 is Too Human. Released in 2008 for the Xbox 360, after what can only be described as a horrific development window, the game only received a lukewarm reception from gamers. The development process for Too Human was riddled with difficulties, shifting release platform 3 times, going from PlayStation to GameCube, and eventually to Xbox 360, all incurring substantial cost. That, along with the general development of the game, meant the final budget came to somewhere between $80 and $100 million. Despite the astronomical budget, only around 700,000 units were sold, making it one of the worst commercial failures in gaming, certainly up to this point in time. Too Human, whilst ambitious, fell short of gamers' expectations, specifically with the gameplay itself, with clunky and imprecise combat, and a camera that quite often got in the way and hampers the overall experience, which isn't what you would expect for a game that took 10 years to develop. Things only got worse for developers Silicon Knights when they tried to sue Epic Games for failing to deliver a working game engine, alleging that Epic was sabotaging Unreal Engine 3 licenses. Epic ultimately won this lawsuit and then countersued for somewhere in the region of $4.45 million, which ultimately led to the company filing for bankruptcy. Next at number 4 we have APB, All Points Bulletin. All Points Bulletin was an open world multiplayer game developed by Real-Time Worlds, released in 2010. The title took an outrageous 15 to 20 years to develop, during which time the rights to the game were sold off and purchased by several different companies, leading to a staggering $100 million budget. Despite the lengthy development cycle, the game released and felt incomplete. This accompanied by the fact that players not only had to purchase a copy of the game, but also then had to continue to pay a subscription in order to continue to play the game, ultimately led to its untimely demise, not even lasting 12 months before the server shut down, leading to Real-Time Worlds declaring bankruptcy. The rights to the game were then purchased in by K2 Network, and it ended up being re-released as a free-to-play game. Taking us into the top 3, we have Suicide Squad: Kill the Justice League. An action shooter released in 2024, developed by Rocksteady Studios and published by Warner Bros., this spin-off to the massively more successful Batman Arkham series was met with resounding negative reviews upon release. Despite looking visually appealing, the main complaints from both gamers and critics being the unnecessary implementation of live service elements, repetitive gameplay, and a poor story. Many fans of the series and of DC Comics in general describe the game as a soulless cash grab, and while the actual budget isn't known, it was reported that the game fell massively short of expectations, and that Warner Bros. Had lost more than $200 million in total on the game, which is more than substantial, and commercially at least led to this project being a complete disaster. At the penultimate number 2 on our list we have Concord. Concord was a multiplayer first-person shooter developed by Firewalk Studios and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment, and was released on PlayStation 5 and PC in 2024. Now, this title is estimated to have only sold around 25,000 copies and only had 700 concurrent players on Steam on launch day, so you might be thinking that whilst obviously not a success, what makes this rank so highly on our list? Well, Concord's budget exceeds $400 million, that's right, $400 million. One of the main reasons for this was the marketing, or should I say lack of marketing for the game, with pre-launch marketing almost non-existent. It's no surprise many gamers weren't even aware of the game's existence until after it launched, and considering it was a new IP, there was no brand awareness that could even partly make up for the lack of marketing once the game had been released. With this level of recuperation required, the game could never be expected to break even, let alone make a profit. There is, however, one more game which had an even worse time when it comes to loss of revenue and failing to break even. And that game, taking the number 1 spot, is of course E.T. the Extra Terrestrial. Released in 1982, developed and published by Atari, this game is often cited as the primary cause of the video game console crash the following year, and the biggest commercial failure in gaming history. Atari only gave the developers 5 weeks to develop the game and had extremely unrealistic sales goals due to the success of the movie of the same name. When adjusted for inflation, Atari paid Universal Pictures somewhere between $63 and $79 million for the rights to publish the game. Initially, copies of the game were being sold for around $50, however mass returns would lead to the game costing Atari around $100 million and contributing to the company's total losses of over $500 million that year. The damage this did to the industry as a whole at the time even led to companies unrelated to Atari losing out on hundreds of millions of dollars, and while no official figure has been produced, it is estimated that the total cost during the video game crash was somewhere arguably in the billions of dollars, that's billions with a B, and led to many unsold cartridges of the game being crushed and buried in landfill sites. These cartridges would remain buried until 2014 when they were eventually recovered. Although initial estimates put the number of cartridges that were buried at over 1 million, it was verified once the excavation had been completed that the number of cartridges recovered was somewhere around 700,000. Many of these cartridges have now been sold on some for over $1,000 to various collectors. The Smithsonian has even kept a copy due to its significance and the impact the game had on the market following its horrific launch period. And that just about wraps up our pick of the biggest flops in gaming history. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to support the channel, and if you've had experiences playing any of these games or others you think could quite easily make the list, make sure to drop them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Nah, didn't you hear? We're out on good behavior.
We are not.